Hello and welcome to The Wicked Truth. Today I've got a lot of stuff coming for you guys. Just want to give you a sneak preview. So next I'm going to review for you Radicals, which I just finished today. It's a pretty good book, which I'll talk about in detail when we get to it. And then I'm going for Extreme Value Hedging. How activist hedge fund managers are taking over the world. I think that's going to be pretty interesting. And finally, permission to screw up. Now, I'm the original screw up here, so I'm going to look forward to that. But today, what I want to review for you is Dead Companies Walking by Scott Fearon. It's a book about a money manager, a hedge fund manager, who came up in the 80s in Texas. So it starts off deep in the heart of Texas, where he witnessed the collapse of the Texas oil boom, and he took advantage of that. Then he started his own hedge fund and moved to San Francisco, where he watched the .com collapse, took advantage of that. And it is a book about the story of his business life. So it doesn't really go much into his family life and those kind of things. But it talks about his adventures in business. He interviewed about 1,500 companies, all stock market listed companies, while working as a hedge fund manager. And it draws a lot of insight. So there's a lot of stories about his interviews and exchanges with different companies. And what he means by dead companies walking, at least what I think he means by dead companies walking, are like kind of zombie, companies that should have failed but haven't failed. And the function of what he does as a hedge fund manager, and that's not the only thing he does, but one of the main things he does is he actually shorts companies. And we'll get into what possibly shorting is. Not that I'm an expert at it, but by shorting companies, he actually predicts which companies are going to fail and then takes advantage of that situation. And this function of what hedge funds do and what money managers do by shorting companies is actually a counterintuitive function. This function is actually highly advantageous for the market. And why that is, I'm just going to get to in a second. But just going a little bit further on. So the book has a lot of stories and examples about what happened and why several of the companies that he visited failed. And then finally, the book kind of ends in a more philosophical note that really everything together. So the first maybe 3/4 of the book is more stories from his life, and the final end of the book is quite surprising, and he gets much more philosophical, and he really goes after a lot of the corruption especially in the US market. So I think this book's got a little bit of everything for everyone. It's not a book just talking about how great capitalism is. So he actually goes into and explains about a lot about how actually money managers today and the markets today are rigging the system. So have a look at it, consider it. I think you're going to like it. So that's the review part of the book. Now, what is shorting? I remember after the 2008 crash, there were a lot of stories going on around about greedy hedge fund managers and stock market players and all these people shorting companies, and that was blamed for a lot of the collapse in the stock market. But after reading this book, I started to realize that perhaps that's not actually what happened, and the regulators themselves who banned the short selling actually reversed their decisions a few years later on. So what short selling is essentially you borrow shares instead of borrowing money. So let's say you want to short Tesla stocks. Tesla stocks are one of the most shorted stocks at the moment. And we'll get into why you might want to short them, but you would, let's say, borrow Tesla shares of someone else who owns Tesla shares and immediately sell them. So essentially you borrow shares, immediately sell them, and then sometime later you buy back the shares and give it back to the person you borrowed the shares from. So how would this, let's get into a practical example. Let's say Tesla shares. Let's say Tesla shares are worth $100 right now, and you borrow one share off a guy who has Tesla shares, and you say, hey dude, I'll borrow one share of Tesla from you, and I'll give it back to you in a month. Okay, and a month passes, and the share is only worth $50 at that point. Obviously, you'd only need $50 to buy the share, and you'd give it back to him, and you'd pocket the difference because you sold the share for $100. So, and now, why is this useful? It sounds like the stupidest thing that could ever be, that you could come up with. And where do you get this market of borrowing shares from anyway? So, let's start with why it's useful and what function it actually plays in the stock market. Now, why is a share worth anything? That's the first question you've got to ask yourself. So a share's price is the confidence the stock market has in its future. Sorry, got interrupted there. Okay, so why is this useful? Now, we've got to think about why a share is worth anything at all. Now, getting back to our hypothetical Tesla share, what the value of $100 on that share is actually expressing is the confidence the people who are all involved in the market, the stock market, believe that the share is that's the value of the future earnings of the company, the discounted earnings of the company, if you go to fundamental theory. So that's why the share is worth $100. Now that expression of confidence in the company that it's going to have future revenues worth $100, hence it's worth $100, right? So now let's just say there are people in the market, and this is why I'm using Tesla as an example, that don't believe that the Tesla share is going to be worth $100, right? So by shorting the company, you're expressing your disbelief, i.e. you're saying, hey, I think Elon is not actually telling us the whole truth here, or maybe it's not the truth. Maybe he is misguided. He believes in his company a lot, but we don't believe in the fundamentals of the company. So that's a signal to the rest of the market that, look out, we've done our studies, and our studies show that we don't think it's worth that much. We think it's worth less. So we're betting against the company. And without the shorting function, without people shorting companies, all you have is exuberance. All you have is salespeople telling you how great things are. And the only signal in the market, so all people can see is prices rising. And if all they can see is prices rising, they think, oh, let me buy now because the prices are going to carry on going up and then I can sell and make a profit. And that's how bubbles are born. But if short selling is there, then there are people betting against that. So it's a signal in the market saying, hold on, there's a lot of people who believe that fundamentals may not be quite what they're being sold to us as. So it's a very, very important signal in the market to have the short sellers there. So what Scott Fearon says in this book, and he gives plenty of examples where he interviews companies. Blockbuster's a very good example. Right now, it seems pretty obvious, right, that Blockbuster would have failed with Netflix coming along. But at the time, it wasn't that obvious. And it was smart people who were in the market, analyzing the market, who actually shorted the Blockbuster stocks and actually sent that signal in the market that, hey, this business model is no longer working. And this is why, and now let's get to the main point. How is producing quick failures actually useful? It seems counterintuitive, but why is it so? The exact reason is because it frees resources in the market. Resources which are being held in dead companies, essentially. Once they're liberated, the human capital, people who are working, just imagine all that management of Blockbuster, for example, who are endlessly toiling away, producing nothing of value. They were released from their jobs and now they're working elsewhere. It's not as if they went unemployed forever. The retail space that Blockbuster was using was released and now other shops can go in. So this quick turnaround is actually a very useful function in the market. And people who bet against exuberance, who analyze things deeply and actually are not only sending signals of, hey, we think everything's hunky-dory, but also putting signals in the market saying, hey, we don't think that salesman there is up to good, or we think that this management of the company just believes in themselves so much that they're deluding themselves. And we don't actually believe that the stock is actually going to do what they claim it's going to do. And hence, short selling is actually highly advantageous. And we should thank short sellers, and perhaps this video, well, not my video, but this book might inspire you to actually think about short selling, although he kind of advised against it because the rules have changed, making it harder for short sellers. There are more people in the market, it's more competitive, but it's an option available and something worth considering. I didn't really get into why and how people actually borrow stock and how that actually happens, the mechanism behind it. It's not in this book, so maybe that's for another video. But thank you for watching. Take care, and really I hope you do consider this book. Take care. Bye.